What do you know about Wales? It has a lot of sheep, it's got a fancy pants version of cheese on toast, and it's been the punchline for an Englishman's jokes for well over a millennium. Well, forget all that, because today we're going to look at the Wales that never was. I'm using Crusader Kings 3 to tell an alternate version of history. Not better or worse, just different. I'll follow one dynasty through the years and see where my imaginary history book leads them. There will be great kings and queens, but there'll also be a lot of terrible ones. Sycophants, perverts and idiots. This is part 2 of the saga of Wales, and let's just have a quick reflection on where we've been so far. So the first video, A Realm in Turmoil. There's a link somewhere on the screen if you haven't seen it, but the Cliff Notes version is essentially this. Starting in the year 1066, the Welsh prince Blethen had aspirations of coming out on top of the Norman conquest of England. He didn't manage this. What he did manage was to murder, maim and piss off just about everyone in Britain. In his pursuit of a strange and confusing goal, he killed, 4 kings of England, a few dukes of Normandy, he assassinated the Holy Roman Emperor for reasons that are still unknown. He killed 2 different kings of Scotland, the first because he thought they were up to something, and the second because he needed a scapegoat for a plague. He murdered several of his own line because they were mildly irritating to him, started a blood feud with another great Welsh house, and caused his own family to turn on him after a disinheritance spree. He died alone and unmourned. Up next was his grandson, Blethen II. He was a lover, not a fighter. He brought the vassals together with hunting trips and rowdy feasts, though his reckless spending ran the coffers dry, so he appealed to the papacy for financial aid. And by that I mean he banged the Pope. And got paid for it. Some claim the plague that ravaged his land after his various Pope bonking sessions was sent by God. It's still disputed. But he died coughing, spluttering, and slightly aroused. The crown passed several times in the next few months. His first son reigned for 21 days, the second for 4 months. But members of his family were dropping like flies. Finally, the throne was taken by Etha, who did what her ancestors never could. She united her countrymen and founded the Kingdom of Wales. And this is where our new story picks up. So begins Chapter 2, The Rise of Wales. Queen Etha got to where she was through tactical alliances. Her first son married a Danish princess and her daughter a Bohemian prince. As her fame grew, more nations wanted to get on Team Wales. An alliance was formed with Scotland, which was great considering the history between the two countries. That is, Etha's great-grandfather and his hobby of killing Scottish kings when there wasn't much else to do. But that grudge had either been forgotten or they never found out. As long as Etha didn't bring it up, they'd prove a powerful ally. She lent her army to the Holy Roman Empire, aiding them in several wars across their land. Again, this was another nation that had suffered ill at the hands of her homicidal ancestor, but she was putting in the work to repair these rifts, and more importantly, not mention them. These alliances proved crucial in the next stage of her plan. And for any of you watching that are new to Crusader Kings and need my #1 tip for succeeding, just get allies. Seriously, they will do all the hard work. Have yourself a pretty kid and marry them off. Then borrow that army to conquer your neighbor. It works every time, most of the time. So, Etha's plan. With Wales doing well, there was one obvious area for expansion: England. Trouble is, England is pretty strong. Getting a foothold would be a lot of work. But due to a fortunate twist of fate, something peculiar happened. One province suddenly turned independent: Shropshire. She could take it, gain a county in England, without going all in on a war with a powerful neighbor. But there's another reason why this was a big get, and it's not a game-related one. Get ready for a very quick history lesson. See, Shropshire has always been a point of contention between the Welsh and the English. Its biggest town, Shrewsbury, or Shrewsbury if you're posh, is located about 9 or 10 miles from the border. Back when William conquered England, he constructed a great big wooden fort there to keep the rowdy Welshmen at bay. The Welsh, understanding how fire works, ended up sacking the castle and burning it to the ground. They got driven out by the English, and this time learning from the story of the 3 little pigs, they built their fortifications out of stone. This held firm for a while until the country fell into Welsh hands again in the 13th century with an invasion by Llewellyn the Great. A little later, King Edward I of England held parliament in the county to decide the fate of the last free Welsh ruler, Dafydd ap Gruffudd. and they didn't give him a good end. He was hanged, drawn and quartered, and Edward I went on to conquer and subjugate Wales. So yeah, Shropshire is a big get for an imaginary Welsh timeline. So Etha marched her armies in and took the county, and this would act as her launching pad for the Great Welsh Invasion of England. She set her bishop to work fabricating bogus claims on nearby counties, and he went the distance. He managed to produce a claim to the entirety of Mercia. Waving her badly forged documents, she ordered her allies to attack and marched into England with a red wave of righteous Welsh warriors. Little by little, the Welsh conquest of England gained momentum. She took Mercia and then Cornwall. Her reign was getting even more impressive and heads were turning. So she decided to give them even more to talk about. She started spinning the legend of how she was a descendant of Cardach, that is, Cardach, the 5th century king of Powys, who was driven out of his home by Irish pirates. This worked to boost her legacy, but also gave her what she believed to be a justifiable reason to invade Ireland. You imprisoned my ancestor in the story I just made up. Yep, ironclad. It sounds ridiculous, but this wasn't even the most outlandish story being spun in the world. Some were claiming they were descended from King Arthur, others were peddling the tale of how they faced off against Satan himself. Medieval storytelling is full of hyperbole. Another reason I like this mechanic. It needs a bit of work and some tuning, but I enjoy seeing these ridiculous and obviously fake stories sweep across the land. With the propaganda engine churning and her people behind her 110%, Etha made one last big push into England with her third and final invasion, this time taking Essex. With the land she'd acquired so far, she had the ability to usurp the kingdom, which is something Welsh leaders have been dreaming of for centuries. The former Kingdom of England shattered and the dukes had a simple choice: join your new queen or be crushed by a Welsh, Scottish and Danish wave of steel and horses. They chose the first option. Her great-grandfather Blethen I had set himself the goal of meddling in the Norman conquest of England and coming out on top. He failed miserably and ended up lashing out and killing anyone who looked at him funny, though all it took was a few generations and a leader who wasn't a raving lunatic. Technically, and I say this with great hesitancy, technically his plan worked. All it needed was 100 years, a few generations, and the armies of 3 other nations. So 100 years since William had rocked up on the shores of Pevensey, and England was firmly and safely in Welsh hands. So now would be the time for Etha to kick back and put her feet up. But she still had a little bit of fight left in her. So England, Wales, and a good chunk of Ireland were firmly under her control. Just beyond the Channel, though, was a lovely patch of land. Historically, France would have 1,000 years of animosity with England, but this isn't history. This is Crusader Kings, and France's fight would now be with Wales. Etha sailed her legions across the water, beaching in Normandy, quickly overwhelming the local defense. As the war raged on, France got absorbed into the Holy Roman Empire, and the threat of a more substantial retaliation was mounting. Etha did not relent. She kept the wheels of war turning, eventually capturing and absorbing northern France into her land. You'd think the locals would be resistant to their new Welsh overlord, but they got on board. Nearby vassals were left with a choice: join the Holy Roman Empire or join the much cooler, much more progressive Kingdom of Wales. What started as a forceful conquest ended in French nobles bending the knee and joining on their own volition. They rallied beneath her banner and conquered distant lands in the name of Catholic fervour. The Pope, and just to point out, not the same Pope that copulated with her father, crowned Etha's sister as the new Christian ruler in central Iberia. When this happens in the game, you get the choice of picking up as the new ruler and building a fresh kingdom, which I would usually do. But not here. Etha's story wasn't quite finished. With her realm and influence sprawling, she committed her nation to the history books and founded the Empire of Wales. Fun fact, the name Wales and Welsh come from an old English word that means foreigner. When the empire was founded, I renamed it to the more apt Cymru, but then realised there was still a lot of mentions of Wales and Welsh in the game and reverted the name back to Wales to avoid confusing viewers and myself. As her army swept across mainland Europe, the Empress decided that she was going to spend her twilight years travelling the continent. She'd lived most of her life cooped up in Britain, and surely there's got to be more to see than just sheep and fields and rain. It was around this time that she decided to change up her look. She opted for some fetching sunglasses, going for a medieval Jackie Onassis look. I think it worked for her. During her travels, she fancied trying a local delicacy in Italy. Pizza, they called it, and it sounded delicious. This was a huge mistake. Have you ever had a really bad pizza? Not just a bit greasy or flavorless, but something that literally broke your mind, body, and spirit. That's what happened to Etha. She ate the pizza and became infirm, and was then carted around the next stretch of her journey on her deathbed. No assassin could touch her. The wars and plagues that rolled across her land would pass over her like water off a duck's back. In the end, all it took was a bad slice of pizza to end the greatest ruler Wales ever had. Though obviously, they wouldn't tell the people about that undignified end. After the Empress had died, or bit the crust you might say, her son Arthur took the crown, his first decree to bury his prestigious mother. Burials are a new feature, and not something I do with every ruler, but it can be pretty useful here and there. In this case, you've got a fresh empire and a lot of vassals to manage. A lot of them have high expectations, and a new ruler doesn't have the legitimacy to keep them in check. Holding a formal burial is a fail-safe way to bump up that legitimacy and ease the transition between rulers. There will probably still be a bit of unrest, but this helps lessen the blow, especially crucial when a plague is also ravaging nearby lands, which was the case for poor old Arthur. Having grown up in opulence, the new emperor had grown accustomed to a certain way of life. Wales was rich by this point, and Arthur funneled his money into vast pleasure palaces and feasting halls. He'd bring his vassals together frequently to dine and party, and unsurprisingly, they quite enjoyed his rule. Booze and food was flowing freely, and outside of a minor uprising here or there, his reign was relatively quiet. His mother was a woman of ambition, but not Arthur. As long as his wine casks were full, he was content. As the years ticked by, he grew fat and complacent, eventually drinking himself to death with no notable achievements earned. From the moment his head touched the crown up till his soul departed his body, he partied. That's a hell of a life for some folks, but Arthur's son wanted more. Like his father, Philip was also a drunk. Not so much out of choice, I assume his dad just got him onto the sauce from a very early age. After the party king had died, Philip's underlings were growing annoyed that their new leader didn't want to blow their empire's economy on getting sloshed every weekend. His early reign was mired by uprisings and rebellions. Was this just life now? Either drink yourself into an early grave or deal with everyone hating you? Philip looked to his grandmother's stories and started telling new tales of her greatness. Etha was still popular, and word quickly spread. It became clear for him he wasn't going to be like his father, getting fatter and drunker with each passing year. He'd follow in Etha's footsteps. Now, that seems like something that's easier said than done, but not really. Certain legends in the game give you a decision upon completion to embark on a legendary adventure. This is what Philip wanted. This, I think, is my favourite outcome for a legend. I get bored when a nation gets too big, so being able to constantly cycle your dynasty into becoming a scrappy go-getter again and again is my ideal way to play. I am curious to see how often you guys use this decision. Let me know in the comments. So as the empire bickered, Philip packed his bags and waved adieu. He took a small army, bolstered by a massive army on his voyage, and ended up finding a lovely patch of land in Spain. It was somewhat inhabited, but that's not really a problem when you've got an army in tow. He settled into his new home and was ready to start his next chapter. Wales, but on the Mediterranean coast. It was all planned out, but there was one thing he didn't account for. See, Philip was brave and stricken with wanderlust, but he wasn't particularly smart, especially in the areas of European geopolitical conflicts. What he had inadvertently done is sail face first into the Iberian struggle and pitched his tent on a powder keg of clashing faiths and cultures. But he wasn't going to leave his new home. Some of the locals were actually quite pleased to see him pop in and vowed to join his up-and-coming kingdom. And so he formed his own nation. It was new, and it was south of his original home, so he opted for the obvious name, New South Wales. The old empire was left to its own devices, helmed by his various brothers who were, frankly, idiots. Iberia would be the stage for the next chapter in this Welsh family dynasty. To his west, Philip saw beautiful sun-drenched lands to spread his influence across. To the east, there was a behemoth of a storm brewing. Best not look that way. If you stuck around this long, good on you, and thank you. There will be one final chapter in this tale, maybe two, And I can tell you now, things will get spicy. Be sure to subscribe so I can let you know when it's out, or click the link on the screen if you are from the future. Events are about to take some unexpected turns, so let's get a wager going. Leave your predictions of what the future has in store for Philip and his children, and I will give a shout out to any who get close in the next video. Until then, thank you for tagging along to hear the saga of Wales, and I will catch you next time.